Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we are going to be talking specifically about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and we're going to talk about the Season 1, Episode 1 of the 1983 Dungeons & Dragons cartoon, and we are going to talk specifically about how Gary Gygax about sympathy for the satanic panic people who looked at Dungeons & Dragons and said, this is scary. Like, this game is very, very scary. And there's two views, right? There's actually multiple views, but let me talk about two very prominent views. There is the view of the people who are, very much pro D&D, and they're like, what a ridiculous fear. These people thought that the game was dangerous to 12-year-old children, and that they thought that people were going to get confused about what was real and what was fantasy. What a ridiculous fear. They were so silly, so stupid, right? And you will see it all over Twitter. Just people like, oh, those crazy people in the 80s who thought D&D was dangerous. How laughable it is now, right? That's one view, right? Then there are people who are like, Dungeons & Dragons had some problematic history, man, and well, I'm here to tell you that problematic history is deeper than we thought. I've been watching the 1983 Dungeons & Dragons 1980s Saturday morning cartoon series, and I want to talk about Episode 1. I want to talk about September 17th, 1983. The fruition of Gary Gygax's work happens, and this thing comes out, and it is incredibly important, and it is precious to us now. He accomplished something huge, right? If you play Knave, or if you play some OSR game, right? Where's your Saturday morning cartoon? Oh, you ain't got one, right? Where's your $100 million movie? Oh, you ain't got one, right? Where are the references to your game in Community and True Detective and a million other mainstream movies? You ain't got one, right? Right? Gary Gygax worked incredibly hard to make Dungeons & Dragons world famous, and I'm telling you now, a huge part of Dungeons & Dragons world famousness is this Saturday morning cartoon. Gary left in 1981, 7 years after the game was created, and he's creating this thing, and I'm telling you right now, there is something in the 1980s, in Season 1, Episode 1, Night of Tomorrow, Season 1, Episode 1 of the Dungeons & Dragons TV series, the cartoon series, the Saturday morning cartoon series, that is absolutely shocking and should give every single dungeon master and dungeon player a new idea and more sympathy and more empathy with the satanic panic D&D haters, right? Because they were not out there spouting nonsense with no prompting. They had prompting, okay? They had prompting, and I'm going to present it to you now, right? And the prompting came directly from the Saturday morning cartoon, right? So work on this thing started 2 years before it showed up on television. In 1981, Gary Gygax is over there in Hollywood. He goes over and he goes, hey, I got this brand new narrative engine, right? Now he says, oh, it's a game, right? Like, whatever, right? I think Gary knew that Dungeons & Dragons was way more than a game. I think, so this is what I'm saying. I really think that game is a mask that this massive Osmandius, just like world-changing narrative engine. That's what Dungeons & Dragons actually is. It's a narrative engine. It changes the way humans tell stories and are impacted by stories and are affected by stories, right? It is fundamentally much more than a game, and I think Gary knew that from the beginning. That's my humble opinion. I know no one else is saying that. I think Gary knew what it was from the beginning. I think he planted a seed, and people saw the blooms at the beginning, but they're just now beginning to see the deep root system that this thing has, right? And it's way more than a game. Game is a mask that Dungeons & Dragons wears, in my humble opinion, and it's far more than that, right? All right, so Gary Gygax goes in 1980 to Hollywood, and he's like, hey, check this out. So I have this new game, and there's a lot of moms and dads out there who are really worried about it, particularly moms. There's an organization called Moms Against Dungeons & Dragons. It's called MAD, right? Now, actually, that might not even exist at this point, but there were definitely signs that parents were freaked the heck out, right? Because, and how we know that? In 1982, right? Tom Hanks did a movie called Mazes and Monsters where people were like, I am hecka scared of what's happening, right? Like, and so already there are problems with Dungeons and Dragons. So guess what Gary Gygax does? This is hard to even process, right? He's like, oh, I got this game, and, you know, moms and dads are really scared about their 12-year-olds playing. And what they think is going to happen is they think there's a problem where the moms and dads are confused, that the kids will get confused, and that they will fall out of this IRL world and they'll fall into the Dungeons and Dragons world, either in mind and body, either in spirit and mind, or maybe even completely in body, right? And so Gary Gygax is like, yeah, I got this game, and I want to make your Saturday morning cartoon, but you know what? Let's do this. Rather than just make a story about the classic 4, classes, fighter, rogue, wizard, cleric, why don't we take players from the IRL world, and in the first few moments of the show, mix fantasy and reality so that the players of Dungeons & Dragons are literally trapped in the Dungeons & Dragons world and have no ability to return to the real world. And you're like, was Gary Gygax trolling every American, dad and mom? Like, your 12-year-old is playing this game, and then you're like, you're playing this game, and you're down here for 12 hours a day, and you don't really seem to want to come up here, and talk to us or live in the real IRL world. Is this safe? Is this okay? And Gary Gygax is like, watch this. Check out the show that is all about Dungeons & Dragons that is on your American television right now. And let me tell you, in every single episode, that it is quite possible that your kids will be lost in the Dungeons & Dragons world. In fact, that's what my show is about. I'm going to Isekai your kids, right? So people start playing Dungeons & Dragons, they interact with Dungeons & Dragons, and then they can no longer get back to the IRL world. They're trapped in the D&D world. This was literally what every, PTO mom and PTO dad were terrified of, right? And Gary Gygax says, "Yeah, I'm gonna reaffirm your fears. Like the show is going to give you lots of clues that your kids very well may never want to live in the IRL world and be quite trapped, spirit and mind, in the in the D&D world." And in my Saturday morning cartoon about the game, that's the whole premise, is that they cannot get out of the world that you are worried they will not want to get out of, and they'll be trapped, spirit and mind, in the game, right? Like, so you look back and, like, the Satanic Panic people were like, I don't like your game. Like, your game has a cover where there's a red devil holding a lady who's missing a lot of her clothes. Is that like a, kind of an occult reference? It looks heck occult, right? And so he makes this mistake, and you're like, oh, well, Gary just made a mistake on what he did with the cover. But then he doubles down in 1981, goes to Hollywood, and is like, let's make a show about my game where the players of the game cannot return to the IRL world. They can't return to the real world. They're trapped in my game world. And you're like, what? This is crazy, right? Like, this is... So I will say right now, this is the point of this video, the Isekai aspects, right? If you don't know what Isekai is, it's an anime term. It's a robust genre in anime where you get trapped in the game, right? And you are trapped you leave the real world, you go into the game world, and you can't get back, right? Gary Gygax was Isekai in American Kids back in 1983. He started in 81, and it was on TV in 1983. 7 years after hearing complaints about his game that parents were afraid that their kids would be trapped, mind and spirit, in the game. He's like, I'll put it in the show that they'll be trapped bodily and they'll never be able to return, right? So here's the thing. I think it's very hard to not understand. Gary Gygax 100% threw gas on the fire. There's no, you can't not see that. Looking at it now, it's clear as day. Gary Gygax fueled MAD, Mothers Against Dungeons and Dragons. He gave them robust, burning, hyper flammable fuel for it, right? And he did very little to calm people down. Now the reality is, we are Monday morning quarterbacks. It all worked. It all worked, right? Like, the American press covered it like crazy, and kids ate it up. And guess what? I'm here to tell you, Nothing makes the game more attractive to the kids than when the parents don't want them to play it. All right, and that ain't changed today, and it's the same today as it was in 1981, in 1983. If you want your kids to play D&D, don't give it to them. Keep it to yourself. Make it look precious, and do not share it with them. It's the best way to share D&D. So that's the point of my video. Is it is very clear. If you look at the Saturday morning cartoon, man, that thing was fuel to the fire for Mad. And we should have more sympathy for the Satanic Panic people, because the game was giving them very real clues that the game was not safe. It was safe, but Gary Gygax was not showing that to them. All that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.